I stood on the porch of my family's ranch, clutching the yellow notice taped to the fence post as if it were a death warrant. The wind had peeled it halfway off, causing it to slap rhythmically against the weathered wood, a cruel, mocking sound. My heart pounded as I read the message again, though every word was already seared into my memory. You have 72 hours to demolish all unauthorized structures or face legal action, monetary penalties, and potential removal. Westfield Ridge Homeowners Association. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just a notice. It was a threat, a direct challenge to the legacy my family had built across 4 generations. My grandfather, a World War II veteran, carved this land into a home with his own 2 hands. In 1982, my father added the red barn that still stands proudly today. Just last spring, I built a small greenhouse and a wooden chicken coop. Nothing extravagant, just practical additions to the land we've always called home. But apparently the HOA disapproved. What they failed to understand was this: they didn't own the soul of this land. We did. 3 days later, with a little research at the county recorder's office, a call to the property tax assessor, and some well-timed advice from a friend in commercial real estate, I turned the tables. By the end of the week, their rent had tripled. Yes, their entire HOA clubhouse, their gym, the tiny parcel of land under their tennis courts. I legally owned it. They'd been leasing it for $1 a year under an ancient 99-year family lease signed by my great-grandfather. That lease expired last Thursday. They gave me 72 hours to tear down my ranch. I gave them 30 days to pay triple rent or vacate the land their precious amenities sit on. The HOA president, Diane Langford, nearly fainted when I delivered the paperwork in person. Her hands trembled as she tried to hold her phone steady and threatened to call legal. But I had already been to legal. I smiled at her, calm, cold, the kind of smile that only comes after you've been bullied one too many times. And then I leaned in and said, "You thought I was just a rancher. You should have done your homework." And that's when the screaming started behind the door of the HOA boardroom. But how did we even get here? Let me take you back. Back before the notice, before the threats, before Diane Langford and her HOA henchmen tried to make my life miserable, because this war didn't start with legal documents or triple rent. It started with a horse, a loud rooster, and a cup of lemonade. My name is Travis Carter. I'm 41 years old. I live in Pinewood County, Colorado, just on the edge of the Westfield Ridge community. My ranch is a modest 12 acres, but it's my pride. I raise chickens, keep bees, and board a few horses. I even run riding lessons for local kids on weekends. It's peaceful, or at least it was. The real story started about 4 months before the notice when I met Diane Langford for the first time. Diane was the newly elected HOA president of Westfield Ridge, and boy, did she walk like she ruled the world. Blonde bob haircut, crisp pastel suits, clipboards under one arm, and judgment in her eyes. Her husband Howard was quieter, tall, bold, always 3 steps behind her, usually wearing a strange smile like someone who'd lost all his battles years ago. They showed up unannounced one Saturday morning while I was hammering new planks onto the chicken run. Diane didn't greet me. She just looked around and said, "We've had some complaints about the noise. Is that a rooster?" I glanced at Billy, my proud old Rhode Island red, who crowed again as if on cue. "Sure is," I said, "part of the ranch." Diane clicked her tongue and scribbled something down. Howard tried to be friendly. "It's a lovely place you've got here. Real rustic charm." I nodded. "Thanks." My granddad started it. Been in the family since '49. Diane didn't care. She was already inspecting the fence line like a health inspector on a mission. "We'll need to talk about that coop," she said. "I don't believe it was approved by the HOA Architectural Committee." I set my hammer down. "I'm not in your HOA." She paused. "Excuse me, this ranch is private land, not part of Westfield Ridge. Never opted in." She froze for a second, then recovered with a tight smile. "Well, your property borders the community, and some of our residents have voiced concerns." "About what?" "Noise, smells. One child claimed your horses startled her. They're in a fenced paddock." She glanced again at Billy the rooster, who crowed like he was enjoying this. "I'm just letting you know," she said, voice tightening, "that we'll be keeping an eye on things." And just like that, Diane turned and marched off, Howard shuffling behind her. That was the first time. The second time was worse. It was early spring, and I'd opened the ranch gates for a neighborhood fundraiser, pony rides for kids' lemonade, and a few games. I even invited some of the Westfield Ridge folks. It was meant to build bridges. That's when I met Sarah Morgan, a single mom from the HOA community. She showed up with her daughter Abby, who was 7 and battling leukemia. Abby was pale, quiet, and clung to her mother's side until she saw the horses. Then her face lit up. "Can she ride?" Sarah asked. "Even just a slow walk." I smiled. "Absolutely." That day, Abby rode my gentlest mare, Daisy. She giggled the whole time. Sarah cried quietly on the bench. After the ride, Abby insisted on feeding Daisy carrots. Diane showed up halfway through. She didn't smile, didn't wave. She stormed over to me, red-faced. "Travis, did you get permits for this? It's just a friendly community day. You have vendors, you have rides. Do you even have insurance?" I handed her a copy of my ranch's liability coverage. She wasn't expecting that. Then I offered her lemonade. She didn't take it. 3 days later, a letter showed up. Violation of zoning codes, unauthorized events, unpermitted structures. It wasn't from the county. It was on HOA letterhead. That's when I knew this wasn't about rules. It was personal. She didn't like the ranch or the animals. Or maybe it was that the kids loved this place more than the HOA playground with its fake mulch and broken swing. Over the next few weeks, it escalated. Complaints about roosters, reports of loose bees near the community pool. One neighbor claimed my goats were staring menacingly through his fence. Then came the notice. Tear it down. 72 hours. No court order, no sheriff's badge, just paper. I could have panicked, but instead I went digging and I found gold. Turns out back in 1927, my great-grandfather, James Carter, had signed a lease with the town to let a small parcel of his land be used for community recreation purposes. It had been renewed once in 1949 for 99 years. That lease, it expired 4 days before the notice arrived. And guess what stood on that land now? The HOA clubhouse, gym, tennis courts, a picnic lawn, all of it. Legally, it was mine again. And that's when I made my move. A lawyer helped me file the reversion paperwork. Then I drafted a new lease, $3,000 a month, triple the original rent, which no one had paid in decades. I hand-delivered it to Diane. She opened it with shaking hands. "You can't do this. I already did." Howard looked at me like he wanted to thank me. But Diane, her face twisted. "We'll see you in court." "You will?" I said. "I've already reserved the date." Behind the boardroom doors, the shouting started, and then a loud crash, and then silence until someone screamed, "What do you mean we're trespassing?" But that was just the beginning. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments because things are about to get wild. We haven't even scratched the surface yet. The day after I delivered the new lease, I woke up to find my front gate wide open and one of my signs torn down. It was a small wooden sign I'd painted myself. "Welcome to Carter Ranch, Esther 1949. It meant nothing to most people, but to me it was a tribute to every callous hand and early morning that built this place. Now it was lying on the gravel road, snapped clean in two. I didn't get angry, not then. I just picked it up, dusted it off, and quietly nailed it back to the fence post. Then I did what every Carter man before me would have done. I saddled up my horse, checked on my hens, and went about my chores. But the silence that morning wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. I could feel eyes on me from the HOA walking path that bordered the back end of my pasture. From the second-story windows of the homes closest to my fence, people were watching, waiting to see what I'd do. Diane hadn't responded to the new lease notice. No call, no email, no payment. But I wasn't waiting around. I was building my case. I went to the county courthouse, pulled every document related to the original land lease, every zoning map, every plat line. I highlighted everything. I took photos of the HOA facilities sitting on my property. I logged every day they failed to respond. Meanwhile, things got tense in the neighborhood. Some people from Westfield Ridge started acting funny around me. A man named Phil Jacobs, one of the HOA board members, walked his dog by the ranch every morning like clockwork. But after the lease delivery, he started picking up his pace when he passed, pulling his golden retriever like they were escaping a crime scene. Another woman, Jessica Crane, who once brought her son over to visit my baby goats, now looked at me like I was holding a flamethrower instead of a feed bucket. But not everyone had turned against me. One afternoon, I heard the crunch of gravel and turned to see Sarah Morgan's old Toyota pull into the drive. Abby was in the passenger seat wrapped in a little pink blanket, her head baldled from treatments, but her eyes still glowing when she saw the horses. Sarah got out and walked over slowly. "I heard what they're doing to you," she said. "It's not right." I smiled. "They picked a fight they don't understand." She looked down, biting her lip. "They told me, if I supported you, I'd lose access to the HOA Kids Fund. That's how I pay for Abby's art therapy." My jaw clenched. That was low even for Diane. "You know, you can still come here," I told her. No HOA needed. That night, I hosted another small event, just 3 families. No signs, no banners, just campfire, marshmallows, and pony rides under the stars. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't tell anyone, but I saw shadows watching from across the pasture. And the next morning, there was another envelope. This one was red. It said I was being sued by the HOA for interference with community peace, illegal gatherings, and property encroachment. It was a joke, but jokes can cost money. I called my lawyer, Camilla Ortega, a tough-as-nails woman who grew up working cattle in Texas before becoming the sharpest legal mind in the county. She laughed when she read the HOA complaint. "They're shooting blanks," she said, "but they want to scare you, drain you, drag you." "I'm not scared," I said. "I'm just tired." Camilla nodded. "Then we fight smart." Over the next week, we gathered more evidence, photos, records, testimonies from people who'd been bullied by the HOA. And then something unexpected happened. One morning, a stranger showed up at my gate. Tall, lanky guy in a Denver Broncos jacket, sipping from a coffee thermos. "You Travis?" he asked. I nodded. "My name's Ethan Wells. I'm a land assessor. Got hired to reevaluate property lines out here." "By who?" He hesitated. "The HOA, of course." "They think they can redraw the lines?" I asked. Ethan chuckled. "They're grasping, but I had to come." He walked the perimeter with me, took notes, but at the end he said, "For what it's worth, your case is solid. If anything, they're the ones trespassing." I thanked him. He paused before leaving. "You know, Diane's been president here for 5 years, but lately people are talking. Some of them are tired of the drama." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the homeowners?" He nodded. "There's whispers of a recall vote." That was interesting and something I could use. Later that afternoon, I drove into town to check on my feed order. When I returned, there was a commotion near the edge of my property. Several HOA members were gathered by the fence lines shouting. As I got closer, I saw 2 sheriff's deputies standing between them and my ranch hand. Luis. Luis was a quiet guy, mid-30s, reliable. He worked weekends and helped with the horses. He looked shaken. "They tried to come on to the ranch," he said. "I told them to stop. One of them shoved me." The deputies confirmed that no one had crossed the actual fence line, but the tensions were rising. "You might want to put up a camera," one deputy said, "or a no trespassing sign." I thanked them, but my gut churned. This wasn't just petty anymore. It was getting dangerous. That night, I barely slept. Every creak outside made me get up and look out the window. I kept my rifle nearby, not to use it, but just in case someone forgot that this was still private land. Then came the morning. That changed everything. I was out feeding the horses when I heard tires crunching up the gravel. I looked up to see a city vehicle followed by a black SUV. Diane stepped out of the SUV. So did 2 men in suits. One of them held a file folder. "Mr. Carter," he said, "we've come to serve you with a temporary cease and desist order. The HOA is filing for an emergency injunction." I blinked. "On what grounds?" "That your land use is causing distress to the community, that you're interfering with community functions, that your structures pose a safety hazard." He handed me the file. Camilla was already on speaker before they pulled away. "They're bluffing," she said, "but we can't ignore it." I looked at the papers, and then I looked beyond them toward the clubhouse, the gym, and the tennis courts that all sat on land they no longer owned. "All right," I said quietly, "time to play their game." The next morning, I walked to the clubhouse fence with a big white sign under my arm. I nailed it to a post just before sunrise. It read, "Notice private land. Lease terms expired. Access revoked until payment received. Trespassers will be prosecuted." The HOA board met that night in a panic. The next morning, something even bigger happened. Someone had chained the clubhouse doors shut with real iron chains. A bright orange notice was stapled to the door, "Locked due to unpaid rent by order of property owner." Diane called the police, but the police couldn't do a thing because legally I was right. And that's when she completely snapped right there in front of cameras because a local news truck had shown up too. I watched from my fence line, arms folded. This was far from over, but it was finally my turn to fight back. And the next move, let's just say it was going to be loud and permanent. It was just after dawn when the rumble of heavy machinery broke the silence. The sun was barely peeking over the ridge. When I opened my front door to the sight of a bulldozer and two flatbed trucks pulling onto the edge of my property, specifically the sliver of land that extended behind the HOA's beloved tennis courts and gym. They weren't mine. They were sent by Diane Langford. And trailing them like a royal procession was Diane herself, standing tall in her pastel blue pantsuit, arms crossed, lips tight. Beside her was Phil Jacobs from the board and one of the HOA's lawyers, same guy from the cease and desist. Diane was grinning like the devil on Sunday. "Travis," she called out cheerfully, "I'm just letting you know, since you claim to be the legal landowner, we've decided to clean up the place a bit. Remove some of your unsightly debris if that's even allowed." The bulldozer's engine growled to life. I didn't move. I didn't blink. Instead, I lifted my phone. "Smile." I said, "You just officially committed trespassing and unauthorized use of private land." Click. I got it all. The trucks, the people, the smug faces, the timestamp. They had crossed onto my side of the line now. By noon, Camilla had filed a temporary restraining order against the HOA board's executive members, halting all activity near the disputed property. But it was too late for one thing. They had already torn up the west pasture fence, a part of the original Carter boundary line built by my grandfather. When I saw it lying in splinters, something in me snapped. This wasn't just a battle over land anymore. This was war. I called in favors, big ones. That afternoon, 3 massive commercial development survey trucks rolled up my gravel road, followed by a fleet of contractors. These weren't random workers. These were urban developers I'd partnered with during the last real estate downturn. People who owed me more than a few favors. Diane saw them from across the road. She marched back down with Howard trailing behind, his face pale. "Travis," she barked, "what exactly are you doing now?" I looked at her and smiled. "I'm preparing the land for development." Her mouth opened, closed. "This is ranch land," she hissed. "Was ranch land?" I corrected. "Now I'm thinking a few rental units, a little commercial space, maybe a farmer's market. You know, the kind of thing that blocks your tennis court view." "You wouldn't." "I would." The HOA members panicked. Diane's phone rang constantly. I heard her yelling at someone. Maybe Phil, maybe the lawyer, maybe the mayor. None of it mattered because within days the local newspaper picked up the story. A feature titled "Rancher Fights Back Against HOA Tyranny, and He Owns the Land They're Standing On." And just like that, public opinion flipped. Locals loved it. Social media went wild. Memes, hashtags, even a t-shirt that said, "Don't mess with Carter Ranch." But just as things looked like they were turning, something happened that knocked the wind out of me. A call came in from the county inspector's office. The voice on the other end was stern. "Mr. Carter, we received a tip. Your barn is being used for public events without a safety clearance. We are required to perform an immediate inspection. You'll need to shut it down until further notice." That meant I couldn't host the local kids, couldn't run riding sessions, couldn't let Abby or any of the others back in. I hung up the phone and sat there quiet. The low point I hadn't expected had hit like a train. Sarah showed up later that evening with a basket of fresh bread and a worried look. "They're trying to break you," she said. "But you're not alone, Travis." I didn't have the heart to argue. I just looked at the barn. Empty, quiet, cold, like they had managed to drain the soul out of it with one phone call. That night I walked the pasture alone, just me and the wind, until I saw something in the dark. At first I thought it was a coyote, but then I heard giggling. Three teens were on the HOA tennis court sneaking in after curfew. One of them yelled, "This place sucks now. Can't even use the gym." "My mom says we're moving." Another laughed. "We should set the dumb place on fire." They were joking, but it hit me hard. Deanne's choices were hurting everyone, not just me. The next morning I sent Camilla an email. "Let's go public. Everything. All of it." She called me 5 minutes later. "You sure?" "Positive." By noon we had delivered a complete press kit to 3 news outlets, including original lease documents, video of Diane's bulldozers trespassing, the torn fence, and even the kids' testimonies about how much the ranch meant to them. The local TV station ran a primetime special that night. The headline, "Community Hero or HOA Victim, the Carter Ranch Battle That's Dividing Westfield Ridge." The story was fair, honest. It showed Abby feeding my horse, showed Diane yelling at Camilla on courthouse steps, showed footage of the gym chain shut and the land deeds I now held. Within 24 hours, the HOA's Facebook page was flooded. Comments, angry emojis, calls for Diane's resignation. But Diane, she didn't back down. Instead, she doubled down. The very next morning, a moving truck showed up in front of her house. Not hers. Mine. Someone had filed a fake report with a private relocation company claiming that the ranch was being repossessed. They started backing into my driveway before I stopped them at the gate. The driver, confused, said, "We got a service order." Said everything needed to be cleared off this land by 4 p.m. I pulled out the deed, showed him the press article, told him the truth. He cursed and said, "Someone's going to pay for this prank." I didn't doubt it, but as I stood there watching the truck pull away, my phone buzzed. Camilla. She sounded breathless, excited. "Travis, the county just posted the decision." "What decision?" "On the cease and desist." I held my breath. "It's been thrown out. They ruled it was based on biased complaints and personal vendettas from the HOA. Your land rights are secure. You're free to resume all operations." I sat down on the porch steps. The barn could open again. The kids could return. Abby could ride Daisy. But just as I smiled for the first time in days, Camilla said one last thing. "There's more." I looked up. More? They've scheduled a formal investigation into Westfield Ridge HOA. Misuse of funds, voter suppression. You started something bigger than you realize. And just like that, the battle had grown into something else entirely. Not just a fight for my land, but for every neighbor who had ever been bullied, ignored, or pushed aside by power-hungry HOA leaders. And Diane, she was running out of places to hide. The next few days were unlike anything I'd ever lived through. My quiet ranch had become the center of a storm. News vans showed up at dawn. Drones buzzed over the pasture. People I didn't even know were stopping by just to shake my hand and say, "Thank you for standing up to them." But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a man hanging on by a thread. I couldn't enjoy the attention, not with the way Diane was moving in the shadows. Despite the public pressure and calls for her resignation, Diane hadn't stepped down. In fact, she'd gone full Ice Queen. The HOA meetings were now held behind closed doors. No minutes were posted online. Homeowners who asked questions were met with vague emails and pending investigations. But then came the breaking point. One evening, as the sun was dipping low and the barn glowed gold in the light, Sarah called me, panic in her voice. "Travis, they canceled the community garden." "What?" "They said the land use agreement was void. They're blaming you." My stomach dropped. The garden sat right at the edge of the Carter property. For years, it had been maintained by local residents, mostly retirees and single moms, who grew vegetables, herbs, and flowers. It was one of the few good things the HOA had done. But the truth, that garden was also on my reclaimed land. I hadn't said a word about it, not once, because I believed in what it did for the community. And now Diane was weaponizing it, claiming I had revoked permission. A flat-out lie. That night I walked to the garden. The gate was padlocked. A sign hung on it in big bold letters. Closed by order of landowner. Trespassers will be prosecuted. I hadn't written that. I stood there heart tattooing as a small group of residents gathered, muttering angrily. Guess Travis wants to bulldoze everything. I knew he was just doing this for attention. I should have known he'd ruin it for everyone. I turned. Sarah was behind me, her face pale. You didn't do this, did you? No, I whispered. Then I took out my keys and snapped the padlock open. A few people gasped. This garden is yours, I said loud enough for all of them to hear. No one told me you had to leave. In fact, I was going to help fund a greenhouse next season. Someone asked, but the sign. I didn't write that. Diane did. The silence hung heavy. Then one by one, people started walking into the garden again, planting, watering, restoring. But that lie changed something. I realized Diane wasn't just fighting me anymore. She was trying to turn the entire community against me. And in some ways, it was working. That night, someone egged my barn. The next morning, I found broken beer bottles at the end of my driveway. One had a note stuffed inside. Not everyone's on your side, ranch boy. I handed the note to Camilla. She frowned. It's time we show them what you're really made of. How? We're not just going to expose Diane. We're going to outvote her. That was the plan. According to HOA bylaws, if 25% of homeowners signed a petition, they could force a special election to remove the board president. Camilla and a few volunteers, including Sarah and Louise, got to work canvassing door to door, house by house. Some people slammed their doors. Others signed eagerly. But the real moment of hope came when a woman named Helen Douglas, one of the oldest residents in Westfield Ridge, opened her door. Helen was sharp, wise, and not easily fooled. I knew Diane was trouble when she started finding my grandson for chalk drawings on my own driveway, she said, signing the form without hesitation. You just make sure you don't become her on the other side of this. That stuck with me. Don't become her. A few days later, we had 73 signatures, just enough. The HOA board was forced to announce a recall vote for Diane Langford in 21 days. It was on, and that's when she pulled her most extreme move yet. Diane filed a lawsuit against me personally, claiming emotional distress, slander, and loss of community value. The suit demanded $500,000 in damages, $500,000. I read it at the kitchen table, my hands shaking. This wasn't just a power play anymore. It was a full-scale attack. Camilla showed up within the hour. She read the suit, sighed, then said, "We'll crush this in court, but we need to make it public." So I agreed to one interview, just one. It aired the next night. A quiet sit-down with a local journalist in front of the barn. I told the story from the start about my grandfather, the lease, the threats, the lies, the garden, and finally the lawsuit. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just told the truth, and at the end of the segment, the journalist asked me, if you could say one thing to Diane right now, what would it be? I looked at the camera and I said, I'd say thank you. Thank you for reminding me what this land really stands for. Not just tradition, but community. And I'm not going anywhere. The interview went viral. Support poured in. Dozens more HOA residents who hadn't signed the petition before showed up at my gate asking how they could vote. One woman brought cookies. Another dropped off a jar of homemade pickles. Sarah cried when she saw the line of neighbors asking how to help. But then 3 days before the vote, someone set fire to the tool shed behind my barn. It wasn't big. It didn't spread. The fire department got there in time, but the message was clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot, and the next chapter would start with a criminal investigation. The sky was still dark when I smelled the smoke. Not a campfire, not barbecue. Burning wood, char, melted plastic. I threw on my boots and ran toward the back of the barn where the tool shed sat. By the time I got there, flames were licking up the walls like angry fingers. The air was hot and dry, thick with black smoke. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the hose and turned it full blast, shouting for Luis, who came running from the bunkhouse barefoot, still pulling on his shirt. We fought it for 10 minutes before the fire truck came barreling down the drive. The firefighters took over, and I stepped back, coughing, my hands shaking. The shed was a total loss. All the tools, the feed bins, a saddle I'd owned since I was a boy. Gone. But thank God it hadn't spread to the barn. The fire chief was a guy I knew. Tommy Grant, a good man who'd played ball with me back in high school. He walked up, adjusting his helmet. "Travis, this wasn't an accident." I swallowed hard. "You sure?" "Accelerant near the door. Shed doesn't even have electricity. Someone set this, and just like that, everything got real. This wasn't vandalism, this was arson." The sheriff's deputies came out a few minutes later. Flashlights swept the perimeter. One of them found a gas can in the brush, half melted, fingerprints likely destroyed. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the note they found nailed to my chicken coop, scrolled in black marker on a ripped piece of cardboard. "Next time, we won't miss." That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't even sit down. I stayed up patrolling the ranch with my rifle strapped to my chest, flashlight in hand. Every creak and rustle in the dark setting my nerves on edge. This wasn't a property fight anymore. This was personal, and I knew exactly who was behind it. No, I couldn't prove Diane had lit the match, but I knew her fingerprints were all over the hatred she had sown, her words, her lies, her twisting of facts and rules to get people to fear me, hate me, and now someone had taken that hatred to fire and threats. The next morning, I called Camilla. She listened quietly as I told her everything. "We're pressing charges," she said firmly. "We'll subpoena HOA security footage, gate logs, everything." I agreed, but I also told her something else. "No matter what happens," I said, "we go through with the recall vote." She paused. "You sure you're up for that right now?" "Camilla, I've never been more ready." 3 days later, Westfield Ridge was swarming with tension. Signs went up. "Vote yes to recall Diane." Flyers circulated. Volunteers made calls. Sarah, Louise, and even Helen Douglas stood at the entrance of the community handing out pamphlets. The HOA board tried to stop it. Phil Jacobs claimed the vote was illegal. Diane posted a video online calling it an attack on order and decency, but it was too late. The residents had spoken and the ballots were printed. Meanwhile, I made a quiet decision. I reopened the barn. No press, no fanfare, just kids. Abby showed up with a sketchbook and a big smile. "Is Daisy okay?" "She's perfect," I said, lifting her up onto the saddle. The barn filled with laughter again. Sarah hugged me before she left. "No matter what happens, you gave this back to us, and I held on to that because I needed it." The day of the vote was tense. Cars lined the streets, neighbors whispered, people who'd barely spoken to each other before stood together in line. I stayed home. This wasn't my election, it was theirs. That evening, Camilla showed up with a huge grin and a stack of folded papers. I raised an eyebrow. Well, she dropped them on the table. 76% voted yes. I blinked. She's out. She's out. Diane Langford had been officially recalled as HOA president. I sat down, stunned. It was done. The tyrant was gone. The ranch was safe. Or so I thought. Because just as we were about to breathe again, Camilla's phone buzzed. She picked it up, frowned, then handed it to me. "It's the county clerk," she said. "You need to hear this." I put the phone to my ear. "Mr. Carter," a voice said, "we need you to come down to the office. There's been a challenge filed against your property ownership. Someone submitted an old deed claiming that part of your land was improperly transferred decades ago. If it holds, you could lose everything." I sat there frozen. The war wasn't over. Diane might have been gone, but now someone worse had stepped in to finish what she started. The cold office of the county clerk smelled like dust and old carpet. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and every time a phone rang at the front desk, my stomach jumped. Camilla and I sat across from Mr. Gerald Whitaker, a bespectacled man in his 60s with a comb-over and a serious expression that told me this wasn't a prank. He placed a yellowed, fragile document on the desk between us. "This," he said, tapping it with his pen, "is a title claim submitted by a Mr. Jonathan Langford." My chest tightened. "Langford as in?" "Yes," Gerald said, not looking up. "Diane's husband's cousin. Apparently he claims his grandfather was the original owner of this portion of land, and that your great-grandfather's lease expired illegally. If this holds, the last renewal could be considered void." Camilla picked up the paper and scanned it quickly. "This is flimsy at best," she said. "It's a claim without registration. No stamp, no approval. This doesn't even have a proper chain of title, but it's enough to initiate an investigation, Gerald added. And with that, the floor seemed to fall out from under me. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. All the work, all the fights, all the people counting on me. One man, one old paper, one sneaky cousin, and the whole ranch was back in jeopardy. Camilla took a deep breath and stood up. We'll challenge it. Don't think this means anything, Travis. It's a scare tactic meant to stall you, meant to buy them time. Time for what? I asked. She hesitated. To flip public opinion? To bankrupt you? Or worse, get the land condemned so the county seizes it for misuse. I didn't speak on the ride home. I just stared out the truck window, watching the fences roll past. The ranch looked peaceful, but I knew better now. This wasn't about fences or pastures. This was about power. That night I called an emergency meeting, not with lawyers or press or HOA members, but with the residents. I opened the barn and set up folding chairs in a circle. The lights overhead were dim, the air warm with hay and sweat and nervous energy. Dozens came. Sarah, Helen, Phil, Jacobs. Surprisingly, even some folks who had never spoken to me before. I don't know what Diane told you, I began standing in the center, but someone's trying to steal this land again. And if they succeed, everything we've built here, everything you've helped me defend will be gone. Murmurs, gasps. Phil stood up. I want to say something, he said. People turned. I was on the board when Diane started all this, he said quietly. I didn't speak up. I let her bully Travis. I let her twist the rules to suit her control. But I've seen what this ranch means to the kids, to the seniors, and I'm done staying quiet. He turned to me. If this goes to court, I'll testify. I'll say everything I saw behind closed doors. It was the first time in weeks I felt like I might breathe again. Others followed. A retired Navy vet offered to help pay legal fees. A young mom said her son with autism had only ever smiled when feeding my goats. An elderly man said the ranch was the first place he felt like he belonged after his wife passed. That night I saw it. This wasn't just my land. It was our home, and we were going to fight for it together. The next few weeks moved fast. Camilla filed a counterclaim backed by over 40 signed affidavits from residents. We unearthed dozens of original documents that confirmed the Carter lease had been legally renewed in 1949 and again in 1988 by my father. The Langford document was riddled with holes. One even misspelled his ancestor's last name. But the legal gears turned slowly. Meanwhile, I received a notice from the county inspector. They would be sending a new team to reassess land use compliance on my ranch. Clearly a move instigated by someone high up. When they arrived, 3 stern-faced officials in hard hats and clipboards. I welcomed them politely. They walked the property, took notes, photographed my chicken coop, my bee boxes, even the swing set I'd built near the pond for the kids. Then one of them, a stocky woman with sharp eyes, looked at me and asked, "Is it true your property has been the site of multiple fires and threats recently?" "Yes," I said. "And you've remained open to the public?" "Yes, safely," she scribbled, then looked up again. "That's admirable, but it might count against your land classification. You could be rezoned out of agricultural use." Camilla was standing nearby and stepped forward fast. "That's not legal," she snapped. "You can't reclassify a property based on the victim of criminal activity. That's retaliation." The inspector sighed. "You're probably right, but we've been told to document everything. I think you have enemies who aren't done yet." Later that day, I received a strange visit. A man in a suit, tall and thin, introduced himself as Mr. Kramer, a land developer. He walked my ranch slowly, hands behind his back. "Beautiful space," he said. "Open, clean, valuable." I didn't respond. He turned to me. "I represent a group interested in acquiring this land. We're prepared to offer you $4 million cash." I blinked. "Excuse me. We want to build a residential luxury expansion, townhomes, some retail, possibly a golf course. Your current situation seems fragile. This could help you walk away with your head high." I stared at him. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was insulting. "No," I said. "You can't buy this. Not from me. Not for any price." He shrugged. "I'll leave the offer open. You may feel differently after the court hearing next week." And just like that, he was gone. Camilla called it immediately. They're squeezing you. Threats, legal delay, financial pressure, everything to break you. I nodded. Then I said what I hadn't told anyone. If I lose this land, Camilla, I don't care about the money. She tilted her head. Then what do you care about? I looked out the window at the pasture. At the end of the day, I just want those kids to still have somewhere to ride. She smiled. Then let's win. The week of the court hearing arrived with overcast skies and a bitter wind. The courtroom was small but packed. HOA members, ranch supporters, press, even a few council members from town. Jonathan Langford sat at the plaintiff's table, smug, wearing an expensive gray suit and a watch that cost more than my truck. He didn't speak. His lawyer did all the talking. Camilla, calm and poised, dismantled their case piece by piece. The flawed deed, the missing registration, the fake historical timelines. Witness after witness backed us up, and then the judge asked to see the original lease renewals. Camilla stepped forward and handed them over. I held my breath. The judge flipped pages for a full 5 minutes. Then he looked up. "Mr. Langford," he said, "your claim is denied. Mr. Carter holds rightful and continuous ownership." Court adjourned. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, cheers, applause. But the moment that stuck with me when I looked over to Jonathan Langford and saw Diane seated behind him. Not as a board member, not as a leader, just another angry person watching power slip away. And then as I stepped out into the wind, Camilla touched my arm. "Travis, look." I turned toward the parking lot. A crowd had gathered holding signs, children in riding helmets, seniors in lawn chairs, teens with Save the Ranch t-shirts. And in the middle, Abby holding a drawing she'd made. A horse, a big red barn, a man in a cowboy hat. She ran up to me and hugged my leg. "You did it, Mr. Travis. You saved it." I knelt, tears in my eyes. "No, kiddo," I whispered. "We saved it." But then, just as I stood, a phone buzzed. Camilla answered, her face changing. "What is it?" I asked. Her voice dropped. "They just sent it." "Sent what?" She looked up at me. "The new rent bill." My brow furrowed. "For what?" "For you, Travis." And that's when I saw it. A new twist, a new move, a new attack. The HOA just filed to charge you retroactive rent for unauthorized commercial use of HOA access roads in the amount over $300,000. The war wasn't over. Not yet. They say evil doesn't sleep, and judging by that rent bill, neither did the HOA. $300,000. That's what they claimed I owed retroactively for the unauthorized commercial use of a small patch of asphalt that ran through the edge of Westfield Ridge. A road that touched the back corner of my ranch, a road my grandfather built, paved, and later allowed the HOA to connect to for community convenience. Rent-free, now they were turning that gift into a trap. The papers arrived from a new legal firm, one Diane hadn't used before. These guys were bigger, meaner real estate specialists with reputations for flipping rural land into subdivisions. The letter read, "Carter Ranch has benefited from 12 years of unrestricted access to HOA-managed infrastructure. By using said infrastructure for profit-generating activities, you are subject to back rent, maintenance dues, and commercial liability." They had gone around the land deeds, around the lease, around logic. They had found a new angle. Camilla read it in silence, her jaw tight. "They're not trying to win," she said. "They're trying to drain you. They know you just have spent thousands fighting the Langford claim. This is about bleeding you dry until you give up." I exhaled slowly. I didn't have $300,000. Not even close. The ranch earned money. Sure. We sold honey. We gave rides. We hosted classes. But it was barely enough to keep the lights on, fix fences, and feed the animals. "They're going to try to force foreclosure," I muttered. Camilla nodded. "Or bankrupt you through liens." The pressure was back, and it was worse this time. Quiet, legal, paper cuts one after another until the whole place bled out. And then a knock at the door. I opened it to find Phil Jacobs standing there, a folder in hand. He looked nervous, sweaty. "I did something," he said. He stepped inside and laid the folder on my table. Inside were printed emails, meeting notes, internal memos, all from Diane's time on the board. I saved everything, Phil whispered. At first because I was scared, then because I knew she wasn't going to stop. Camilla scanned them quickly. This is gold, she breathed. There were receipts for personal spa trips charged to the HOA, emails discussing plans to sabotage the ranch, even messages admitting the fake cease and desist order was never filed with the city. Camilla's eyes lit up. We can go on the offensive. But I wasn't sure. I was tired. I looked around my home, the walls built by my grandfather, the photos of my parents, the smell of hay drifting in from the open windows. Then I looked out at the ranch, the goats, the chickens, the trees we planted last year, the kids drawing chalk horses on the barn floor. I couldn't walk away. Not now. Let's hit back, I said. So we did. The next day, Camilla filed a lawsuit of our own. Fraud, harassment, malicious prosecution, retaliatory enforcement. We weren't just playing defense anymore. We named Diane. We named Jonathan Langford. We even named the new HOA legal firm, accusing them of conspiracy to extort under the guise of civic enforcement. And then Camilla called in the final favor. She contacted the local district attorney's office. Within 72 hours, Diane was subpoenaed, not just for HOA mismanagement, but for criminal misuse of public infrastructure for personal retaliation. The hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later, and in that time, the most amazing thing happened. The community stood up. They crowdfunded my legal fees. Within 6 days, the fundraiser had crossed $127,000. People from all over the state sent messages. Kids brought letters. Local businesses dropped off gift baskets. Even the mayor showed up on my porch with a signed city resolution, thanking Carter Ranch for contributions to local heritage and community unity. It was humbling and healing, but the best was still to come. Because when Diane finally walked into the courtroom, escorted by her own lawyer, looking more like a wilted flower than the ice queen she used to be, she was met with a wall of faces. Parents, veterans, children, seniors, all standing behind me. The trial didn't last long. The documents from Phil were devastating. Emails showed Diane actively planning the garden shutdown. She had coordinated the trespassing bulldozers, and yes, she had ordered the rent stunt after losing the recall. The judge didn't even flinch when he delivered the sentence. This court finds that the actions of the HOA under former President Diane Langford constitute gross abuse of power, deliberate harassment, and financial coercion. The Carter family will be awarded damages totaling $480,000. All false claims are hereby dismissed with prejudice. The room exploded in tears. Diane's face crumbled. And me? I sat back and cried. Not from relief, from peace. It was finally over. The land was safe. The barn could stay. The kids could keep riding. And Carter Ranch would live on. 3 months later, a new sign went up near the road. Welcome to Carter Ranch Community Park in partnership with Westfield Ridge HOA. Reformed, where families grow roots. The new HOA president, Helen Douglas, the treasurer. Sarah Morgan, Phil stayed on too. Quiet, humbled, and working hard to make things right. We opened the garden again. We added a nature trail. And every weekend, Abby leads pony rides with a proud grin under her helmet. As for me, I still wake up at dawn, still fix fences, still hear Billy the rooster screaming his lungs out like he owns the place. But now when I walk that land, I don't walk alone. I walk with a community, a family, a legacy. Because when the HOA gave me 72 hours to tear down my ranch, I gave them a lifetime of resistance. And when they tried to triple my pain, I tripled their rent, tripled their shame, and tripled my community in the process. Thanks for listening to my story. Let me know where you're watching from, because this fight wasn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who's ever stood their ground against the impossible and won.